Final Fantasy X-2 is one of my favourite Final Fantasy games. That's a statement that causes a lot of upset within the Final Fantasy community, as that game is often believed to be the beginning of the downfall of the franchise, a breaking of tradition by making a direct sequel to a previous game instead of a self-contained story like every numbered entry usually is, a distortion of the themes and story of its predecessor, and an over-the-top flashy affair that would ultimately lead to experiments with MMOs, thinly veiled Star Wars knockoffs, boy band road trips, Tunnel Simulator 2009, and this.
Bullshit.
I believe Final Fantasy X-2 gets a bad rep though. Sure, it was a shock to the system seeing the shy, demure summoner Yuna become a gun-toting badass in a Charlie's Angels style team. She went from solemnly dancing to guide spirits of the dead to the afterlife, to dancing on stage to J-pop in skimpy outfits. What the hell happened? It was clearly an affront to its predecessor, a game that's often a strong candidate for the best of the whole franchise, due to its emotionally charged story of loss and love. How could they turn this into magical girl dress-up? And I'm here to say that everyone who believes this is wrong. Final Fantasy X-2 is a superb game, not only because it has one of the best battle systems in the entire series, it does, don't at me, but also because its story is exactly what was needed to follow up on Final Fantasy X. Now, put your pitchforks away, I'm about to blow this whole thing wide open and give Final Fantasy X-2 the much needed praise and adulation that it deserves. My name is Bob the Pet Ferret, noted Final Fantasy X-2 liker, and this is Chapter Select, a series all about examining and celebrating video game narratives. And today, as we're near the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy X's European release, I will be arguing that Final Fantasy X-2's story is good, actually. Spoilers abound for both Final Fantasy X and X-2 throughout, so be warned.
It's showtime, girls.
To begin with, we need to break down what Final Fantasy X-2 is about on its own merits. Let's put its status as a direct sequel aside for now. What is the story? Who are its characters, and what is it trying to achieve on its own? You play as Yuna, a young woman who has hitched a ride on her cousin's family airship and teamed up with a goth they picked up on the way to form a team of sphere hunters called the Gullwings. Their objective is to seek out hidden data on the world's history buried for centuries as their world rebuilds following the collapse of an oppressive regime. But this isn't a dour archaeological dig, it's an adventure where rival treasure hunters are digging through the rubble of the past while spouting off one-liners as they race to the prize. Behind all of this is a political story where a power vacuum leaves two opposing factions vying for control, and under all of that is a threat of a mysterious figure looking to destroy the whole world using a weapon of mass destruction. It's a simple story in many ways, but one that relies heavily on character interactions to drive it forward. It is, at its heart, an adventure story where charming rogues duel each other while the greater political and fantastical elements tick along in the background. The method of uncovering the past is very pulp adventure in the vein of Indiana Jones, Uncharted, or perhaps more appropriately, Tomb Raider. There's a distinct vibe of the gentleman thief genre popularised by the Arsène Lupin stories, not least because the Gullwings' chief rival is named after Lupin's author. The vibe of the team, especially with their love of rehearsed poses, is straight out of 1970s female crime-fighting action show Charlie's Angels, which did have a revival film around the same time as the game's release. And the game's battle system is full of flashy visuals and costume changes, straight out of the magical girl genre popularised by the likes of Sailor Moon. What all this means is the story is designed to be entertainment first. It's an action romp full of set pieces, flashy fights, and a cheeky sense of humour.
Think we need a password?
How about kick its ass?
Its true strengths lie in its character dynamics. Yuna is a girl who's coming out of her shell and learning to do things for herself, while her cousin and enabler Riku is the exact kind of peppy, bubbly character that Tara Strong has built a career playing. And the two of them have a dynamic of close friendship and teamwork. Meanwhile, the third member, Payne, is a newcomer whose demeanour with the others can best be described as Robert Smith at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Are you as excited as I am?
By the sounds of it, no.
Despite this personality clash, she is still a solid member of the team who learns to put aside her cold and distant exterior in order to bring a slice of sarcasm to the trio and bring the peppiness down a notch. It's a good combo, and the way the three of them interact across the whole game is a key selling point for me.
Oh, and I was looking forward to hearing the good stuff. Confessions of a Shady Past.
You're a pain. -4 respect points, Riku.
But the people of the world are also a key part of the story here. Aside from the treasure hunting, the politics, and world-ending superweapons, we get to see a lot more grounded, simple character moments as the girls help people with mundane problems. The girls help an unenthusiastic soldier set up a ranch to raise Final Fantasy's beloved chicken mounts chocobos. An old friend struggles with anxiety over becoming a father. And some goofy frog people who feel like they walked out of an Oddworld game want our help in putting on a concert. Even the big stuff is surprisingly grounded and human. In the game's major political conflict between New Yevon and the Youth League, one side wants the world's old knowledge to be shared among all people, while the other wants that knowledge to be carefully curated by the Old Order in order to avoid unpleasant knowledge causing problems in the populace. This can lead to issues such as a couple being separated by the factionalism, the rebellious Youth League faction showing signs of being unorganised but full of good ideals, and even the remnants of the Old Order show signs of humility over rebuilding the reputation they destroyed 2 years before. It's a simple but effective story, and while it is full of these great human moments, it's really just aiming to be an entertaining romp. And sometimes, that's all you need. No one needs Tomb Raider to consider the ramifications of archaeological theft. We just want to see Lara Croft kick ass. Charlie's Angels wasn't a commentary on women in law enforcement, it was just women kicking ass. And Sailor Moon was popular because cute girls with magical powers was an appealing prospect to young girls who wished they had magical powers, and could then kick ass with them. And so it follows that Final Fantasy X-2 is a story about 3 girls going on adventures and kicking ass. And that's fine. There's always a place for this kind of media, the kind of popcorn silliness that just makes us smile. Not every story needs to be a deep, introspective look at life and death. But of course, the shoe puff in the room is that, well, this particular story doesn't stand alone. It is, in fact, the direct sequel to a story that was a deep, introspective look at life and death. So perhaps we should look back at that game to see how it compares.
Listen to my story. This may be our last chance.
Okay, but I'm not sure that this is your story, Tidus. So yes, let's talk about Final Fantasy X-2's protagonist in the context of her original game. Back in the first game, Yuna wore a traditional formal dress instead of hot pants. She carried a magical staff instead of dual-wielding pistols, and instead of a peppy, heroic personality, she was a shy, introverted figure who struggled to speak up and followed her destined path with a sense of duty and reverence. And despite not being the main playable character of the game, she was central to everything that happened. The story followed her pilgrimage, one that would go on to define the fate of the world.
Are you ready?
Final Fantasy X is set in the world of Spira, a world ruled by a religious order and menaced by an eldritch space whale called Sin. The terror of this space whale is central to the world's culture, as they have to expect it to flatten cities and towns across the world at semi-regular intervals, and the only way to gain even the slightest bit of respite is to train people up as summoners. These summoners then call on powerful beings to aid them in battle, and embark on a pilgrimage to the ruins of an ancient city where they call a final summon, seal Sin away, and perish in the process. Final Fantasy X's story focuses on Tidus, a fish out of water who is dramatically sent forward through time when Sin awakens in his city. He joins Yuna and her friends on her pilgrimage, learning about this strange new reality along the way, but as I stated, he is not the main character. He is an audience surrogate, one who is there to ask questions about Spira so the player can learn the lore and be shocked by the revelations of the world as he is, as everyone else is already aware of how all this works. Final Fantasy X is a tragic story, one about a young woman who sets out on a journey knowing that if someone doesn't get there before her, she will die. But her death will bring joy to the people of Spira in the same way that her father's death did 10 years before. And Tidus, not part of this world, refuses to accept this is the way things are and pushes to find a way to save the world from Sin while also keeping Yuna alive.
I'm telling you, she won't die!
It's a dark version of the typical hero's journey. Yuna, as the central hero, gets the call to adventure through the death of her father and deciding to follow him in later life. She has many mentors, including friends from her home village, a protective cat boy, and a friend of her father's who progressed on this journey before. She enters a world full of destruction and death, and dutifully acts to ease people's sadness in the face of tragedy. She encounters enemies, mainly in the form of a high-level political figure who wishes to marry her for nefarious ends.
Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
But then, as we enter the supreme ordeal and innermost cave, in this case a quite literal cave that leads to the city of Zanarkand, it's clear that there's no reward at the end of all of this. There is only death. It's a twisted, miserable journey that's backed by the status quo. Many Final Fantasy games of this era are about abuses of power. In Final Fantasy VII, we witness the abuse of corporate power as the planet's death is secondary to profit margins. In 8, it's the military-industrial complex sending child soldiers out to war. And in 10, it's about religious order twisting history into a morality tale that accepts a sacrifice every decade or so as an acceptable price to pay for temporary peace. Yevon, the dominant religious order of Spira, thrives entirely on the existence of old men clinging to power beyond their natural life, informing the populace that summoners must be thrown to the wolves, or fruitless battles must send soldiers to oblivion, all because the space whale is a punishment for their sins, hence its name. Hell, they even inform the populace that an entire race of people living out in the desert are fair game for aggressive fantasy racism, because clearly they're the ones dooming us all by still using machines. Yevon plays on the people's fears of death to cause more death. Pointless, inconsequential death because the cycle repeats itself. Sin is never defeated, only temporarily placated. And yet, the people of this world go along with it because that temporary calm is better than nothing.
Don't say it isn't worth it. Because it is.
Even for a little while, people can sleep in their beds without being afraid. That kind of time is worth anything. Don't say it isn't worth it. Your words that day, Yuna, I remember them well.
Which is why Final Fantasy X is such a relentlessly miserable time, and that's not a criticism, because it's intentional. The game even outright states this.
Spira's a little short on fun these days.
This is a world that demands total devotion to the religious order, an order that's corrupt to its very core. This is a world where someone must be periodically killed for everyone else to survive without exception. This is a world where friends and family don't know how long they'll be able to see each other, whether they'll be sacrificed or torn apart by a space whale. This is a world of abject misery, a world ruled by death.
The spiral of death.
Huh?
Summoners challenge the bringer of death, sin, and die doing so. Guardians give their lives to protect their summoner. The Faith are the souls of the dead. Even the maesters of Yevon are unsent. Spira is full of death. Only sin is reborn, and then only to bring more death. It is a cycle of death, spiraling endlessly.
So, in all of this context, it's easy to see how people think it's weird that all of this was followed up with a pulp adventure that opens on a pop concert. It's easy to see why people rejected this shift, and it's easy to think that this sequel might completely miss the point of what the first game was trying to say. But there are quite significant reasons why those changes are present.
2 years ago, we cast off our beliefs here. Our false hope.
The fact that Yuna is alive in the sequel sort of suggests that she failed to sacrifice herself. And it was in fact a task failed successfully, as instead of dying like her father and repeating the cycle, she lived and ended it. Sin was defeated, but this time for real. No coming back in a decade, no more bodies for the eternal meat mincer, just a world free of the deadly space whale. Yuna set out to bring the calm, a period of time where the people can rest easy knowing their home isn't about to be flattened by a space whale, and succeeded so hard that the period of time became indefinite. Maybe they should come up with a new term, like
An eternal calm.
Yes, that'll do. And not only did she remove the deadly space whale from the equation, she also brought down the religious order, making everyone's lives so miserable. She removed them from power, and all it took was teaming up with the heathens who refused to atone, and also her dream boy. And by that I mean the boy who was literally born from a dream. So what happens when a world crushed by oppression and misery, where fun isn't allowed, and devotion to a bunch of old dead men worshipping an immortal warmonger beetle is mandatory, suddenly no longer has to put up with any of that? Of course, they throw pop concerts and bring back coin games and go on goofy treasure hunts. Basically just throw off the shackles, let their hair down, throw on some short shorts and embrace the silliness. Final Fantasy X-2 is an eminently silly game. It's full of goofy characters, ludicrous situations, and the party throw quips at each other.
Fire burn and cauldron bubble!
This is the point. It's supposed to be over the top silly. It's supposed to be an antithesis of everything the world was made out to be in the first game, because the people are finally free, and after centuries of misery, it stands to reason that the world might course correct a little too much and get a bit weird. Of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because the game doesn't hesitate to show how this sudden collapse of the entire ruling order might cause some political problems. And so we see two groups emerge: New Yevon, a desperate attempt by the remnants of the church to rebuild their reputation and convince people that the temples are still places they should visit, and the Youth League, a scrappy bunch of rebellious sorts who believe that Spira needs a new direction, one that puts power back in the hands of the people. This political conflict happens continuously in the background and is one of the dominant plot threads that runs throughout the game. But despite this conflict, it's clear that this argumentative factionalism is still better than not knowing if your house would still be standing in a year's time. Spira was a miserable, horrible place. A place to suffer and die and be thankful that you even got to do that in the first place. But then Yuna turned it all upside down, and now everyone's emerged from the darkness. And it's time to finally do all the things you were forbidden from doing. It's time to stop existing and start living. And through all this suffering, there's perhaps no other person in this world who deserves to embrace all of this than our main protagonist. It's one of the most common complaints I hear about Final Fantasy X too. Yuna was a shy, demure woman who just wanted to do the right thing. And then the sequel rolls around and now she's a slutty pop singer in hot pants. Look, I get it. You leap from one game to the other, there's gonna be some whiplash. You go from this beautiful, sad, heartfelt moment on the airship, and then suddenly go to Yuna Lara Crofting up the place in the sequel. I get it. I see your point. But no, this absolutely does not ruin her character. Let's break this down and introduce a little known concept called character development. The truth is, who Yuna is changes across both games. Again, despite Tidus's insistence that it is his story, it is in fact her story. She experiences a whole character arc. She starts Final Fantasy X as a quiet, somewhat insecure girl. Her childhood was spent missing her parents after her mother got eaten by a space whale, and then her father became a summoner and sacrificed himself. And so she resolved to follow in his footsteps and bring joy to the people again, if only temporarily. At the start of the game, we see her becoming a summoner after earning her first Aeon, and as the game progresses, she walks her path with a devoted faith that she is doing the right thing. But the journey is hard and full of struggle. She witnesses the destruction of Kilika and the futility of Operation Mihen and had to perform the ritual to move spirits on. She had to deal with a lecherous politician who wished to marry her for creepy reasons. He wanted to what?
To destroy, to heal, Spira. I will become sin. Yes, with your help.
Okay, that was unexpected. But beyond those already traumatic things, her entire journey proved to be a sham. Yevon leaders artificially extending their lives to continue their corrupt rule. Summoners killed and their guardians stuffed into a space whale to continue the cycle, and horrible genocidal attacks on an entire race of people. Is this what Yuna was truly fighting for? Upon seeing all of this, she has doubts that all of this is truly worth it. But with the help of a strange boy from another world and his space whale dad, she finds a new path, one that will aim to end the cycle permanently. one that will truly make the people happy. And at the end she succeeds, but the boy who helped her, the boy she fell in love with, is forced to leave. Yuna grows considerably in her pilgrimage. It's the age-old story of a devoted religious girl who meets a boy who plays sports and rebels against her parents and all the entire religious order she was raised in. And who she is at the end of the game is much less naive, much more experienced person than when she started. That still doesn't explain the hot pants though, but to be honest, there is a portion of the story that was originally missing which does a good job explaining them.
First, a costume change. You need a new look.
Yes, that's right, the hot pants are Riku's fault. That's the entire explanation. Okay, now let's talk about Eternal Calm. It's a short 15-minute film, I guess. It takes place between the two games and was originally released as part of a re-release of Final Fantasy X in Japanese and released to American players exclusively through the official US PlayStation magazine. Europe never got to see it until the remastered collection included it at least a decade later. In this, we see Yuna's life 2 years on from the end of Final Fantasy X, and it's clear that she doesn't have much of a life. She spends her time moping around hoping to see her dream boy again and taking meetings with people who see her as the saviour who can answer any questions put to her. She is clearly unhappy, unable to truly celebrate the victory she has brought the world. Her life feels hollow and directionless now. And well, it would. Yuna spent her entire life readying herself to become a summoner and then be part of the cycle, to sacrifice herself at the age of 17 to the Great Space Whale and then drift off to the far plane to become a ghost. That was her entire plan, and then it got derailed and now here she is, 2 years older than she ever expected to be, a young woman with all the future in front of her and no real knowledge of how to take advantage of it. She gets offers to take sides in the conflict between New Yevon and the Youth League, but it's clear that both sides only want to use her as the High Summoner who defeated Sin as proof that their side is the correct one. They don't care about her or her needs, they just see her as a political figurehead, a role that she simply doesn't want to take on. She's been through enough already. Eternal Calm makes it clear that she needs a new purpose, and for once maybe it should be something selfish, as she's devoted so much of her life to the happiness of others instead of herself. And so, in rocks her cousin, asking if she wants to take a ride on her family's sweet airship and, oh hey, we found a video of your boyfriend in a cage, wanna go check it out? And it's the perfect opportunity to get up and get out of her doldrums.
I know it's selfish, but this is my story.
And this is where Final Fantasy X-2 comes in. And one thing really stands out to me in Yuna's cool badassery in that game. She's not really all that cool or badass. She's consistently awkward and trying too hard. Because she spent so long living for other people that perhaps she isn't sure who she is herself. She's the devout Catholic girl who grew up sheltered, went to an arts university, got involved with the Alternative Music Society and is now desperately trying to appear cool to them. And her main source of inspiration in how to act is... oh no, it's Riku, isn't it? Oh no.
Oh, poop.
Yuna, don't talk like that!
I'm just copying you.
And so, she often comes across as excessively ditzy and stupid. She's not, she's just playing up the act of it because she's imitating Riku in her attempts to live more carefree. She's in her rebellious phase, living up the idea that no, I'm not like the other summoners, I wear hot pants and wield guns now. Because a lot of Final Fantasy X-2 comes across as a little cringy, and I'm absolutely not going to deny that. But when you view so much of the game's story through the lens of a teenager figuring out who she is and what her purpose in life needs to be, suddenly it makes sense. We were all teens once. We were all colossally dumb in the most embarrassing ways possible. And once you realise that this is who Yuna is in X-2, it all fits together beautifully. There's also another element to this. Sure, she's imitating a lot of Riku, but she's also trying to draw from another influence, the exact person who led her journey to take a dramatic swerve and help see the flaws in the way the world worked. Tidus, the goofy sports ball man with the voice of a space cat, helped her loosen up in many ways, and so much of her journey in X-2 sees her looking back and trying to draw from all of that. After all, when you lose your virginity in a sparkly lake while a J-pop ballad plays and your ever-vigilant cat dad watches on, it changes a girl. And even after your boyfriend abruptly floats off into the ether at the end of your journey together because he was a dream all along, surprise, you're still going to want to draw a lot of strength from your memories of him. It's gonna shape a lot of how you act. Yuna is the way she is in 10-2 because she's trying to find herself in a mixture of copying Riku's ditziness and trying to act in the same carefree way that Tidus did. She's swinging to the opposite extreme of the quiet, unassuming girl she used to be in order to find the middle ground where she really sits. And I think a lot of people have missed that this is a huge part of what Final Fantasy X-2 is about. And considering how many people still miss the point of the first game's infamous laugh scene, that's perhaps not surprising.
It was supposed to be an awkward, goofy, dumb laugh. Here's the script to the part where Tidus is laughing. Here's the laugh. You can see it right here. Ah ha 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 ha.
Anyway, I'm not going to labour that specific point. You should probably go and watch Transparency's video on the laugh. It's great, they're great, you should subscribe to them. But anyway, I'm here to defend 10-2, not the laugh. But okay, I hear you ask, how do we know that Yuna's putting all this on as an act, and it isn't just bad writing? Because that silliness softens as the game progresses, and we begin to see more and more of the Yuna from the first game. Only now, she comes across as more confident in her beliefs. As the temple starts spewing out fiends in the third chapter, Riku suggests loaning themselves out as a mercenary band, and Yuna agrees to the plan because it helps people out. She steps up to speak to the people of Spira as tensions run high, knowing that her input would help people see sense again, even if the notion of her singing was the idea of her excitable Albed companions. And even when they're full-on treasure hunters, she simply can't help but put the group in a position to help people. Yuna was always a kind, selfless person, and in 10-2 that aspect of her constantly cuts through, even when things get silly. And it always comes across as the sincerest aspect of her. She shows genuine sadness at the people's bickering, and the thought of the eternal calm coming to an end after all she went through fills her with great pain. But her experiences have changed her, and by the end of the game we get to see the natural progression of a girl in her position. She sacrifices much to bring people joy, lets her hair down a little awkwardly after some self-reflection and mourning, steps up to bring the people together, and then makes a stance right before the game's final confrontation. She makes it clear that while she wants happiness for the people, she no longer wants the solution to involve someone's death. And so, she makes a heartfelt speech to express this.
I don't like your plan. It sucks.
Okay, fine, maybe it stays a little silly at the start, but bear with it.
We had no choice. Always we had no choice. Those are our magic words. We repeat them to ourselves again and again, but you know, the magic never worked. The only thing we're left with is regret. I don't want friends to die or fade away. I don't want battles where we have to lose in order to win.
This is where the Yuna of Final Fantasy X comes through best. And her putting her foot down on everyone remaining alive to see the fruits of their efforts come together is representative of the strength that she's gained. The final confrontation of 10 was one she stumbled into after a journey of following orders, and while it was successful, it still came at a great cost. The final confrontation of 10-2 is one that she insists on being on her terms after a journey of figuring out what's right for her as an individual. It's her realizing that yes, I can help people, but no, I don't have to give up anything I care about in order to do so. When all the pieces are put together, Yuna's journey across both games is one that's a joy to watch. Across one game we see her learn to accept that she doesn't have to die, and across the second we see her learn to live. And the two games create a cohesive, complete journey for her, and because of this, I deem the second game to be absolutely essential to the story of the first. I have a confession to make, one that summarises why I feel so positively about Final Fantasy X-2, and one that may actually cause some upset. When I first played Final Fantasy X, I didn't like it. As I've already stated, Final Fantasy X was intentionally a miserable slog. It's a game where the deeper you go into the story, the harder the stakes get, the less hope there always seems to be. There's so much death, so much destruction, so little happiness to cling to. It got to a point where I almost stopped caring because it seemed like no matter what happened, it was all going to get undone anyway. Even in the ending, when everything should turn out to be happy and triumphant, Tidus has to leave, and the future is uncertain. I always found this to be an unfulfilling story, one of endless tragedy and pain, and all of it for nothing. And then Final Fantasy X-2 arrived, and it helped me appreciate 10 a lot more. And no, not because 10-2 was so bad that I realised retroactively that 10 was actually good. No. It's that 10-2 did so much to fulfill the promises of the first game. Yuna saves the world, but we never get to see the results of it. We never get to see her celebrate. We never get to revel in victory. It just trails off, leaving us sad at the aftermath. 10-2 shows that it was all worth it. It shows us a world freed from oppression and death. It shows us a world where people can have fun again. It shows us why each and every sacrifice made in 10 mattered. And after Yuna says that the world can now have new dreams at the end of 10, 10-2 shows us those new dreams blooming. If Final Fantasy X saw us battle through the darkness, Final Fantasy X-2 shows us the light at the end. And this is the key to all of this. These two games, in my opinion, simply cannot exist without each other. They are opposites, but this is not a clash, it's a deliberate contrast. 10 is dark, 10-2 is light. 10 is serious, 10-2 is silly. 10 is sadness, 10-2 is joy. Everywhere you look across the two games, you can see parallels, mirror images, and complementary aspects that show the complete story only exists when you put the two games together. Which is probably why the only way to get these games today is via a remaster that clips them permanently together. Final Fantasy X tells a story about a world which has a strict order to follow, but this order comes with oppression and death. Final Fantasy X-2 tells a story about a world of freedom, where people can live how they choose. But it's also chaotic because no one's really in charge anymore. Just like Yuna forces herself to swing her personality entirely in the opposite direction to where it was, the world ends up doing the same for the same reason. Hell, even the structure of the games themselves reflect this. 10 was a linear journey from A to B, starting in Besaid and ending in Zanarkand, while 10-2 gives you an airship from the get-go and lets you go where you want. It's rules versus freedom as a central mechanic. But it goes beyond just these opposites, as they kind of reflect a few central themes, albeit done in a less obvious way. You know how 10 wasn't really about Tidus and his role was to simply guide Yuna's story? 10-2 is kinda the same. While Yuna's character arc still sees growth, the story of 10-2 isn't really about her. It's about Spira, and by her standing on an airship and singing about silver wings, she guides Spira's story. And in a way, that is her real story, taking the influence her friends had on her and using it to influence the world. And Spira's story is almost exactly mirrored between the two games. 10 starts after the world went to hell, while 10-2 threatens to bring hell back. Spira is endlessly menaced by a space whale throughout 10, one that appeared 1,000 years before we, the players, arrive. But in 10-2, a character named Yin is determined to activate a different weapon of mass destruction, one that looks set to bring about the same level of death we saw before. Essentially, the Vecna gun is coming, and everybody's running. And it's interesting because Vecna gun is not an arbitrary boss thrown in so that 10-2 can have an actual conflict. It's a loose end from 10. There's a conversation about ancient machina being so powerful they could destroy the world, but we never learn what happened to any of them, only that Sin arrived and the war ended.
They made weapons so powerful, it was thought they could destroy the entire world.
The people feared that Spira would be destroyed.
10-2 revealed that the great world-destroying machina is still there, and that sphere hunters and other archaeologist types have discovered it, and that's just bad news for everyone. An official canon states that Sin was a weapon of mass destruction designed to fight Vecna gun, which creates another parallel. Yuna ends each game by destroying a WMD created by the two sides of the ancient machine war, finally ending the legacy of that war for good. Yuna banishing the space whale and then dismantling the Goth mech are simply two sides of the same coin. I genuinely feel that 10-2 completes the story of 10 by providing a yang to 10's yin. The two games complement each other, and when put together they make a complete, cohesive story. And without 10-2, I feel that 10 is a little empty, unfulfilling, and inconclusive. But once 10-2 is added to the mix, all of that goes away. But what about Will? I hear some of you ask potentially. And to you, I will simply say that Will is an atrocity. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, Will is an audio drama that got tacked onto the remastered collection to add a third chapter to the story, and it is terrible. It's bad fanfiction that completely undoes the work done across both 10 and 10-2. It reverts Yuna's character back to where she was at the beginning of the first game, undoing all her growth. And it makes the effort to bring Tidus back pointless as their relationship simply falls apart. And it falls apart because he's too carefree, despite Yuna's entire character arc being influenced by that exact character trait. She grew as a character because she learned to be more carefree like him. It's kind of an important detail that the audio drama decides is actually a bad thing for no reason. Also, Yuna becomes a priestess of New Yevon, despite 10-2 making it abundantly clear that she wasn't interested in joining any group outside the Gullwings. Even then, 10-2 mechanically suggests that Yuna isn't too fond of Yevon anyway, because if you side with them in Chapter 2, it becomes impossible to get 100% story completion. Plus, I shouldn't need to explain why she might not want to go back to the religious order that betrayed her and almost had her killed, even if they do claim to be reformed. It makes no thematic sense to do this, and oh hey, time to bring back the space whale for no goddamn reason, making the entire 2 games a waste of time. Thanks guys, this was totally a worthwhile addition. My impassioned argument for why 10-2 is necessary and important also explains why I completely reject Will as canon, because it not only adds nothing interesting to the story, it actively takes away from it. 10-2 enhanced 10 considerably in my opinion, while Will unravels both games for no reason. But if we pretend it doesn't exist, like many fans do, we're left with 2 beautifully complementary games that at first seem completely at odds with one another. But together they are a story of growth, of sacrifice, and learning to heal from tragedy. And without Final Fantasy X-2, I would probably never have learned to appreciate 10 for what it is. 10-2 is a cathartic, silly romp that allows the cast to live instead of just not die, and allows Yuna to go from an uncertain, quiet and unassuming character to becoming a self-assured heroine of the world, who not only wants to make other people happy, is no longer afraid to let herself be happy too. And if that happiness involves wearing hot pants and singing pop songs, then you go girl, live your best life. So there you have it. Final Fantasy X-2 is the perfect complement to 10, and I'm tired of pretending that it isn't. And if I haven't convinced you of Final Fantasy X-2's greatness by now, what can I do for you?